Alright, so I'm going to do a presentation today on mixing, or a video. This is a presentation. I'm going to tell you a few key elements and how to mix a lot better than you're mixing right now, probably. So first, I want to start off with mono and stereo, or poly rather. Mono and poly are short for monophonic and polyphonic. They describe how many sounds or notes can be played or heard at the same time. But the meaning changes slightly depending on whether you're talking about recording, playback, or synthesizers and instruments. So I'm going to talk about both. Monophonic, meaning one channel of audio, is the same sound going to both the left and right speakers. An example of this is a single microphone recording a singer, and that sound is played equally in both speakers. This makes the sound feel centered and not wide. But polyphonic, more commonly known as stereo, means two or more channels. So the left and right channels carry different information. Stereo gives a sense of space, direction, and realism. Imagine a guitar slightly to the left, vocals centered, and drums spread across. This gives the track more space and dimension. Now, in instruments, monophonic means they can play only one note at a time. So if you press another key, it may not play that other note, or it will replace the previous one. This is typically used for lead lines or bass sounds. Moog, however you guys pronounce it, Moog synthesizers are a popular example of this. Polyphonic instruments can play multiple notes at once, meaning you can play chords. Think of a piano or polysynth like a Prophet 6. Now, I've mentioned channels, but what is a channel? A channel is simply a pathway that carries an audio signal. Think of it like a lane on a road. Each lane carries sound from one source to one destination. Each channel represents one stream of sound that can be controlled separately. For example, volume, pan, or effects. Mono audio means one channel. Stereo audio is two, left and right. And surround sound is more than two channels, like 5.1 and 7.1. In a mixing board, or DAW, your digital audio workstation, hopefully you knew that by now, each instrument or microphone typically has its own channel strip, meaning it has its own fader, EQ, and effects. So when people say something like, turn up channel 3, they're turning up that specific sound source. When recording, each microphone or input captures sound through one channel. If you record a guitar and a vocal separately, that's two channels of audio. Imagine sound as water flowing through pipes. Each channel is a separate pipe. Mono is one pipe carrying all the sound. Stereo is two pipes, one for left ear and one for right. Now, panning. This is very important. Panning is a process of placing sounds within the stereo field between the left and the right speakers to create a sense of space, balance, and clarity in a mix. When you listen to a stereo track with headphones, panning is what makes some sounds feel like they're coming from the left ear, some from the right, and some from directly in front of you. In a stereo mix, you have two channels, left and right. By adjusting how much of a signal is sent to each channel, you determine where that sound sits in the stereo image. Imagine your mix as a stage. If each instrument were placed in the center, they would all compete for the same sonic space, and the result would sound crowded and muddy. Panning helps separate them, allowing each instrument to have its own space, much like musicians positioned across a real stage. In most modern music production, there are some general guidelines that engineers follow when panning. The main elements that carry the song, such as lead vocals, bass, and kick drum, are usually kept in the center. This gives the mix a solid anchor and ensures those sounds are balanced equally in both speakers. Instruments that provide rhythm or texture, such as guitars, keyboards, or backing vocals, are often panned slightly or fully to the left or right to open up the mix to add width. For example, rhythm guitars might be panned wide to opposite sides, while a piano could be placed slightly off-center. Now, to balance, when it comes to balancing your mix, drums are a special case because they are made up of multiple parts across a stereo field. The kick and snare are typically centered, while the hi-hat may sit slightly to one side. Toms are often panned progressively across the stereo image to mimic the layout of a drum kit, and overhead or room mics capture a natural sense of space by including sound from both sides. It's important to keep balance in mind because if you place too many sounds on one side, the mix will feel lopsided. To avoid that, you can either place other instruments on the opposite side or use stereo effects like reverb or delay to spread energy more evenly. You've actually seen me do this quite a bit. Subtle movements, such as panning background vocals or percussive accents slightly to one side, can make a big difference in creating depth and interest without sounding unnatural. When done well, panning creates a clear, spacious, and immersive listening experience. Every instrument can be heard distinctively, and the mix feels like a real performance happening in front of you, rather than a cluster of sounds stacked in the middle. Next, we got frequencies, which is also really important. Mixing is all about making space for every sound your track feels clear, so that your track feels clear and balanced instead of muddy or harsh. When frequencies get in the way of each other, it means different instruments are fighting for the same part of the frequency spectrum, and your mix loses definition. When you record or program several instruments, each produces sound waves that cover certain frequency ranges. The human ear can hear roughly from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. The low end, 20 to 200 Hz, include bass and kick drums. The mids, which range from 200 Hz to 5,000 Hz, carry most melodic instruments and vocals. And the highs, from 5,000 to 20,000 Hz, are the air and brightness, meaning the cymbals, reverb tails, and harmonics. The issue comes when too many instruments live in the same band. For example, a bass guitar and kick drum both sit in the low end. If they overlap too much, the mix will sound boomy or muddy. The goal is to carve space so each element has its own zone. The main tools for that are EQ, compression, and panning, combined with thoughtful arrangement. Now, we talked about panning, so let's talk about EQ and compression. EQ, or equalization, is your primary sculpting tool. Instead of boosting every instrument, it's often better to cut. If your kick needs to punch through at around 60 Hz, you can slightly cut that area from the bass so the kick dominates there. Likewise, you might roll off low frequencies using a high-pass filter on vocals, guitars, or keyboards so they don't contribute unnecessary rumble. Think of EQ like chiseling a sculpture. You remove what's not essential so the important parts stand out. Compression also helps by controlling dynamics. When instruments fluctuate mildly in volume, they can suddenly mask others. Compressors smooth this out so each sound maintains a consistent level without overwhelming the rest. You can even use sidechain compression, where one signal, like the kick, momentarily lowers another, like the bass, creating rhythmic separation. If two sounds share similar frequencies, you can pan them differently across a stereo field so they don't stack directly on top of each other. For example, two rhythm guitars can be EQ'd similarly, but panned hard left and right for width. You see, now panning's becoming a little bit more important, isn't it? We're going to use it quite a bit. Finally, reverb and delay, which we learned about last week actually, should be used thoughtfully. Too much can blur the mix, but subtle use creates depth. You saw me actually do this just yesterday. I had a reverb plugin for the master track actually, but I only used very small amounts of it, I believe. Can't remember, but I think I did. I did a whole lot yesterday, so. But yeah, that's true. You do only want to start with a small amount. It's usually better to have one or two shared reverb spaces instead of giving every instrument its own, which keeps the mix cohesive, by the way. A great habit is to mix with intentional listening. Solo instruments to their frequency footprints. To learn their frequency footprints, I apologize. Then bring them back together and adjust until nothing feels crowded. Regularly check your mix at low volume or on small speakers. If you can hear everything clearly, your frequency balance is working. In short, good mixing is about arranging, carving, and balancing. Every sound should have a purpose and a place. Vertically in frequency, horizontally in stereo space, and dynamically in volume. When those three dimensions are in harmony, your mix feels open, powerful, and alive. Now, I want to go over a step-by-step guide for equalization and spatial placement of the main instruments, focusing on how to prevent frequency clashes and build a clean, professional mix. I'll explain 5 steps in plain language so you can know how to hear what to listen for when you try it yourself. Now, the first step is to start with the foundation, which is the kick and the bass, as the low end is where most mixes get muddy. Kick drums power sits around 50 to 80 hertz. Give it a little boost there if you need more thump, but cut slightly around 200 to 300 hertz to remove boxiness. Avoid boosting too much high end. A gentle lift around 2 to 4,000 hertz can add attack, the beater sound, and keep it centered in the mix. Bass fills roughly 40 to 250 hertz. To keep it from fighting the kick, figure out which one owns the very low frequencies. Often the kick generates 60 to 80 hertz, and the bass sits just above that. You can high pass the bass slightly below 40 to 50 hertz to clean up sub buildup. If you want more definition, add a gentle presence boost near 800 to 1000 hertz, where the notes bodies live. Also keep this centered. And a pro tip, use sidechain compression so the bass dips a bit when the kick hits. This makes them work together rhythmically. Step 2 is to shape the rhythm section, which is the drums, guitars, and keys. These instruments fill the mid-range where the ear is most sensitive. Snares sit around 150 to 250 hertz. A boost near 2 to 5,000 hertz gives crack and presence. If it sounds boxy, cut around 400 to 600 hertz and keep the snare centered, by the way. Hi-hats and cymbals are the bright region, mostly around 8,000 to 12,000 hertz. High pass them to remove the low rumble. Pan them slightly left or right depending on your mix perspective, but not too wide. Electric guitars found in the main body lives between 100 hertz to 5,000 hertz. So for this, you want to roll off the lows below 80 to 100 hertz. If they sound muddy, cut 200 to 400 hertz slightly. Add bite by boosting 2,000 to 400 hertz. And then you're going to want to pan the rhythm guitars wide left or right for stereo width. This opens the middle for vocals and bass. Lastly, keyboards or synth pads. Pads fill a wide range, so use EQ to fill them around the vocals or guitars. Roll off the low frequencies below 100 hertz and soften the mids if they compete with the vocals. And you're going to want to pan these moderately to the sides to create width and texture. Now, step 3 is to highlight the vocal. Vocals need to sit front and center. I've just said this a few times actually. So carve space for them. For the low cut, roll off everything below 80 through 120 hertz to remove rumble and pops. The body, the main fullness, is between 150 to 400 hertz. Too much here makes vocals muddy, and for clarity, make sure to add presence around 3,000 to 500 to that. Make sure to add presence around 3,000 to 5,000 hertz to help words cut through. Lastly, air by boosting gently around 10,000 to 12,000 hertz for brightness. Keep the vocals dead center. Use compression to control peaks and maybe add a small stereo reverb or short delay to give it space without pushing back. Step 4 is to space wisely. Now, we already talked about this before, but I'm going to give it a more in-depth description. When all frequencies are balanced, use panning and reverb to create dimension. Center the key low end elements, kick, bass, and vocal. Spread guitars, keys, and backing vocals to the sides. Use reverb to push sounds slightly back in the mix. Less reverb means closer, more reverb means farther away. A good rule is that not everything needs to sound huge or wide. Some instruments sound best small and tucked in. That contrast makes your main elements pop. Now, last step is to clean and check. As you mix, solo tracks to learn their tone, but always return to full context. EQ decisions only make sense when you hear how instruments interact. Periodically switch to mono to check phase and clarity. If everything still sounds balanced in your mix, your mix will translate very well into any system. And I have this chart here for you to look at as well. You can screenshot this. But when you're done after all of this, you should feel like your mix breathes. The kick and bass hold the floor. The vocals sit clearly on the top. Guitars and keys fill the sides, and high-end instruments shimmer without harshness. And that's my presentation on mixing. I hope you learned a lot. I think I did a lot better this time than I did last week. However, there's always room for improvement. So I will see you guys next Thursday. I'll do another presentation then. Peace.